So I wrote the description, and then I read it again this morning and realized I had missed like 6 words, and that's what happens when you do a bunch of distillery tastings. So I came up with the idea of like Azure functions should be your best friend. And really, once you see what they're capable of doing and how much you can do with them, I'm hoping you'll agree because they're pretty cool. So, BFFs. So this is going to be the agenda. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Azure functions. I'm going to show it to you because I'm going to do it live, and I'm going to give you some links. But I don't have a ton of slides because it was like 11 o'clock. And again, the many distillery tastings. So, I don't have much to give away because I was only doing one presentation, but I do have an Azure t-shirt if you can tell me who that is. Pete's Dragon. I don't have a t-shirt your size. I'm sorry. We've already been through this once. So, okay. Well, I'll try to think of another question. I was damn sure not going to pick a new Pete's Dragon because they're remaking Pete's Dragon. So, I don't know if you knew that. So, anyway, a little bit about Azure functions. So, they released, like I said, a build. They announced a build. They released in 2016. And there's a ton of different types of functions that it supports. There's blob triggers, event hub triggers, general webhooks, GitHub webhooks, HTTP triggers, queues, service bus triggers, service bus topic triggers, which I wasn't even aware that was a thing, but you can subscribe to a topic, and then it will trigger it. And then there's a timer. So really what it is, it's a serverless function that you just host in the cloud. And that function can do whatever you want it to do. It can do a lot of stuff. It can do very few things. It's really up to you what you want to do. So just think of you write an application. It wasn't serverless. It was applicationless function. So it's just the function. It's not everything else that would come along with an entire web app or something like that. You can have input parameters and output parameters. You can inject in your own dependencies. So it's kind of like the .NET Core thing. If you want something, you bring in a dependency for it, and then you have that functionality available to you. But the coolest thing is it supports a ton of different languages. Bash, Batch, C#, F#, JavaScript, Python, PHP, and PowerShell. I read them all off of almost memory. I had to look up last one. I'm going to do C# because I could write a little PowerShell, but that wouldn't be very fun. So I'm going to do a C# one. But that's the really cool part is you kind of decide what you want it to do and how you want to code it. So that's just about the extent of my slides. So let me just jump into here. So just to give you a little context, I built a site with our content management system, and you upload images and it saves them into Azure storage. So in my fictitious world, that's what we're going to do. And in my case, my scenario is I'm going to create a blob trigger. So basically, whenever the particular blob container that I'm going to watch changes, it's going to fire off my function to do something. And in my very real scenario is some people are going to be uploading images to the site, and maybe I'm going to reformat them, I'm going to resize them, I'm going to do something with these images, but I don't want to lose their original. So what I'd like to do, and maybe they're giving me a huge image that's like a 10 megabyte image or 100 megabyte image. Not going to happen on this Wi-Fi. It's going to be a little bit smaller image that I'm going to work with. But in that case, I don't necessarily want to keep this huge image if I don't have to. So I'm going to zip it. I'd like to be able to zip these files and archive them, and then I'll work with the original doing what I want to do. I could certainly write a global event handler or something. I could use in the Azure SDK. I could put a scheduled task inside of our system to watch that container and do something, or you can offload all of this functionality to Azure Functions. So basically, I can encapsulate all of that functionality into a very small function, and all of the processing that that function requires, so imagine zipping a gigabyte file or something, that's not happening on my web server, it's just happening over here on the side. I don't even care about it, and it's asynchronous. So it can just happen on the back end. So that's the context of what I have. So I have a very awesomely designed sample page, and I'm going to upload an image, and I'm going to show you just a couple things. So this is my Azure storage container. Not that it really matters, but you're going to see an image show up here. So I'm just going to choose a file, and what was I working with? I was just using these images. Sure. These are like the Windows 7 sample images, like the koala and stuff. So I'm uploading that, and now there it is. If I refresh my Azure Blob storage, you can see there's my image. It's not that exciting. And I'm going to just come in over here, and I'm going to clean that up because now I'm going to set up a function. So really, at this point, this is the image that I would want to archive. I would want to zip and archive it. So I'm going to make an Azure function that will do this, that will do that for me automatically. So I'm going to clean that up just so we can start over. And now I'm going to go in and create the function. So whenever you have an Azure function, you host it in an app service plan. So if you have an existing app service plan, you can just put the Azure function is actually an app service. It's like, I don't know how much people know about the history of it. So first they had cloud services, and then they came out with Azure then they came out with IaaS, then they came out with Azure websites, and then they had Azure mobile services, and there was a handful of others. And then they decided to collectively call them all app services. So now you have Azure web apps are really web app services, and you have mobile app services. Azure functions are another kind of app service. So if you have an app service plan, which allows you to host several app services within it, your Azure function is just one of them, one of the services in your plan. So I don't know why I don't see it. It was here. I'll just have to search for it. It's not a big deal. But I already have an existing app service plan and already created a Azure function app inside of that app service plan called Bryan as demo functions or something. And I have the existing one. I'm going to recreate a new one though. So when you first come to this, they'll kind of guide you through if you want to do it, and it kind of gives you the basic ones, whether you want it on a timer, do you want it to be data processing, do you want a webhook. It really depends on how you're going to interact with your function. A timer will just execute whatever time you tell it to do. It will just execute the function and do whatever it is you want your function to do. The data processing, those are the ones that are typically associated with watching a folder, watching a database or something. And then the webhooks are more of an on-demand function. You're calling from a webhook, or you're subscribing to an event, or you're just calling over a HTTP request or something. And you can choose the languages here and whether or not you want to do C# or whatever. I don't really do it that way. I make a function this way. So this is more the guide, but I'm not familiar. I want a very specific one. So if you just do new function, this is where you can see all of the different types of functions that you have. So this is everything, and these are all the different functions. And you totally could just write a function from scratch. But if you choose one of these, they'll go ahead and stub out some of the pieces for you. Like if it's a trigger, they'll stub out what they expect to be executing or making this thing happen. But and they've done like core, warehousing. I don't even know what experimental is. There's different samples in here, so you can do a ton of different stuff. Actually, there's so many more in here I didn't even know about. I didn't even look. But I guess this is all of them. I'm going to go with a blob trigger. But if you want to, you can choose a very specific language. So if you want to do it in JavaScript, there's certain ones for JavaScript. I'm going to do C# because that's the only thing that I'll be able to code in provisionally. I don't even know how I got to that. Holy cow. Okay. Blob trigger. So it gives you a description here, so it's pretty easy. So when I click this, it's going to say, name your function. And so I'm going to just call it 4, because I've already made them before. And it seems to keep a memory of the log of the ones I made, even though I deleted the function. There's still a memory of their execution. So I'm just making a new one. So in this case, this is going to be a function that whenever someone copies an image up to the site, it's going to, in the back end, it's going to copy it over to Azure Storage, because we have Azure SDK code in our product that does that. But I want to watch that storage container, and as soon as the new image comes into there, I want to zip it and save it somewhere else. So because this is a blob trigger, it wants to know where is it supposed to watch, what container is it supposed to look at. And so that's what this is asking, the path and the storage account. So let me grab this guy, and I'll explain this in a minute. Let's see. And I already have my storage account configured right here, and I create it. So what's happening now is it's kind of spinning up I guess a Docker or like an application, like a blank application with one single thing in it of run.csx and function.json. That's all that's in my web application right now, these two files. And because I chose the blob trigger, it stubbed out in the run.csx, that's your function. That's what's actually going to do something. It stubbed out that it's going to expect in the blob, because that's what's going to be the trigger. So I'm going to replace all this code, but that's just what it does. If I would have chosen a different kind of function, it would have a different kind of run, with different parameters, the timer or whatever it is that's doing it. But in this case, this is what I have. If I look at the function file, function.json, this is the configuration of the, let me zoom in a little bit, maybe that'll help. Okay, that's going to be huge. All right. So this is the kind of the raw view of the function itself. It says it's expecting in a object called myBlob. It's a blob trigger. It's going to be inbound. It's looking in this particular storage account, actually this storage account in this path. And in this case, I'm explicitly saying only have JPEGs cause the function to happen. Because of the path that I designate a specific file type. You don't have to do that. I did it in my case. So the only JPEGs will make this function fire. So if I copied up a PNG or something else, it won't worry about it. So once you're at this point, you have to decide what it is you want your function to do. And you have to pull in your dependencies in order to make that happen. So you come into here and you can create a project.json, and this is where the .NET Core stuff kind of comes into play. I'm just copying it so I don't mess it up. And I want you to watch some stuff. So when I copy this file in, I'm going to zoom out a little bit. So it has this window below here that will kind of just tell you what's happening. And it's, I'll come back to the microphone. This is telling me they had a problem reading that because I just created it, but then once I saved it, then it compiled it. So any change you make, it will happen on the fly, and it will try to compile it. So this will tell you if you're introducing some bad code. So down here you can see compilation successful. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull in the Windows Azure storage NuGet package, because I'm going to end up copying this zip file up to Windows Azure storage. Now, the blob coming in, I don't have to tell it to do that. It just knows that the blob's going to trigger this, but I need to tell my function what it is it needs to do, and in my case, I need to copy it up to Windows Azure storage, which means I need the Windows Azure Storage SDK in order to do that. So in my projects file, I designate Windows Azure.storage and the 7.0.0, and as soon as I save this, you're going to see down here, you're going to see restoring NuGet packages, and then it'll try to compile it again. So anytime you make a change to that project.json, it will try to do that. So if you look right here, I'll unplug that so you don't have to listen to it. You have, it's starting the NuGet restore, it's restoring the packages, it's committing them, and then it's trying to write all the stuff out, and ultimately I got down to here. If you wanted to pull in something else, if you wanted to pull in, like we have a NuGet package, I'm not gonna do it, it takes like 4 or 5 minutes, or not 4 or 5 minutes, it takes a minute or two to compile, to get it in there, but I'm trying to think of another NuGet package just off the top of my head. There was like .NET zip, because when I was testing this, I don't even know if this is gonna work. Actually, it'll be good if it doesn't. So this is if I wanted to pull in another kind of dependency, it's going to try to restore that. I don't even know if that's a real one, so it could blow up on me. It's trying to restore it. Oh, it is, .NET Zip 1.0. So it's gone through there. And so this is how you can, again, pull in whatever dependencies that you need as you write out your function. And if you remove it, it's going to do the same thing again and combine. So in my case, I just need the Windows Azure storage because you have a number of .NET Core libraries are built in by default, namely system.compression, io.compression, which is what I'm going to use for the compression into the zip file. So at this point, I have my function created. I have my dependencies. Now I actually just have to tell my function what to do. And I could put the code into here, but it's a little bit of a, I mean, you can just paste it in there and you do get color coding for it. But one nice thing about this is you can actually open up through Cloud Explorer in Visual Studio. You can go in, I'm in the wrong one. It's like a storage account. It's in here. You can come in and edit this directly from Visual Studio, so you get IntelliSense and all kinds of nice things like that. You can't debug. You don't debug through there, but you have to. But you can get some nice editing experience. So it's under the run.csx. So that's. I'm sorry. The only way, when I did it, I did a lot of log.info, just like this does, and I just write it out to this window, and I kind of have to step through and do it. I think if I had a really hardcore function, I would put it in a regular Windows application, or something. I'm saying Windows, like .NET. I do mainly .NET, if you're shocked, I'm sure. I would put it in a regular .NET site, and I would get it working. and then I would just take that function out, identify what it was dependent on, what specific namespaces or dependencies it had, and then put that into there. I think if I had a really hardcore function, I would do that. The function I have, there's some steps. I mean, I'm going to paste them in, but I basically did this log, which writes to this log window right there, and I did that to try to see what the values where things were, but I don't know if there's an easier way, but that's the way I did it when I was first looking at it. But I can tell you already that this interface already has a lot more in it than when I was messing with this like 3 months ago. They just have updated so much inside of here, new ways to manage and monitor and see things. So it wouldn't surprise me if there's a way to debug it through Visual Studio, maybe already or coming soon. I don't know though. So over here, this is my function. So through the magic of copying and pasting this, I'm going to bring this in, but I'll walk you through the code. All right. I'm going to try to copy it. Come on. All right. So this is my full function code. So let me scroll to the top. So the very first thing I do is I'm going to bring in the system.io compression namespace. Again, that one's built in. There's a whole list of what's built in if you're using C#. There's a number that are available to you, so I didn't have to do that. But this is where I'm also referencing the Windows Azure storage, and I couldn't do that unless I brought in the dependency. So this is the run. So this is the actual function or method that will get called whenever this function fires. And they all have the same one. They all are run. And I'm turning around and calling another thing called create zip blob, and that's because I don't want to do thumbnails. I only want to do the original images. And the way our system, if you copy your files up to our media library, it will create a thumbnail on the fly so we can use it inside the site. And I don't want to deal with those. I only want to deal with the original images. So I'm filtering out the thumbnails in my code here, and then I'm calling this create zip. And then from there, it's really just a regular function. So I have a connection string, I'm connecting to the storage account. I'm basically looking for this archive folder, this archive container inside of my storage account. And if it's not there, then I create it. So it's going to make it if it's not there. And this is where you can see log.error. That will write it to the window. So there's a lot of log.errors or log.info. Actually, I'm doing it right here, log.info, where I kind of give some tracking for myself. And then this is the code that will happen. So once it figures out that container's there, then I'm going to go get the original blob. I'm going to get how long it is. I'm going to convert it to bytes. I'm then going to create a new, I'm going to download it. So I'm downloading the byte array from Azure Storage, and then I'm going to create a new blob.gz, and then I'm going to compress it with the memory stream compress. This is just for my implementation, because this is what my function, what I wanted to do. Your function can do anything you want it to do. But the big thing about it is, I'm not downloading this to my web server. And all of this compression is not happening on my system. It's all happening on the Azure function server. So it has no impact on my system whatsoever. It's just going to happen in the back end. And then I upload it from the stream. I upload it back up to Windows Azure Storage, and then I should say completed. If something goes wrong, I'll say it failed. And then down here, this is my compress, where I convert the memory stream and gzip stream and just whatever. There might be a better way to do that too. I'm not a zipping expert. So once I save that, it's going to write it back, and then you're going to see it's going to try to compile again, because I changed the thing, and it doesn't like something. Oh, that's right. So my code, this is good though. It gave me an error. So I don't know. It's probably hard for you to read, but it says the name blob does not exist. It's because I changed the name of something inside of my function, and I copied in bad code. I copied in code that is not correct, and now I got to try to figure out where I did it. It's right here. It's this one. So that should be my blob. So I save that again, stop it. Save that, and now it should try to compile again. There it's compiling, and now compilation successful. This is all I have to do. That's it. Now this function is done, and it's sitting there, and it's ready to go. So I'm going to open up a couple things. So first, this is my storage account. That is where the original image is going to go. And then this is an archive container inside of my storage account, and it's empty because I haven't done anything. So now, if I go to my site and I upload an image, I'll pick the penguins this time. If I save that, It's going to upload it to my storage account right here. So there it is. Let's see if I can catch this. Let's see. It's going to, that's kind of neat. I don't know why it has these like weird characters in it. All right. I don't know how to do it on a laptop, like to zoom in. I don't know. There's like a control plus sign. I can't remember what it is if I don't have a normal keyboard. I don't know if this will zoom into that window or not. Let's see. Oh, okay, cool, it does. So inside of here, you can see the execution of my function. So this is the last time I saved it. So then it says function started. That's the ID that started it off. And then completed, and this is where it's logging. It's starting the zip, it's zipping up this image, it's copied up the new blogs. That all correlates back to my own logging that I put in here, this log.info. So that tells me that my function is happening. And if I go to that archive folder and I refresh it, now I have penguins.jpeg.zip, and I probably got like an awesome 2 kilobytes of compression. That one's 7.59.6, and this is 757.0. So I've saved a total of 2.6 kilobytes because I didn't pick an image that was very, very big to begin with. But that's awesome because now that's just there. So now if my site were to run, this would just happen behind the scenes. And in this case, I mean, that was just for my, my fictitious use case scenario. If I wanted to, I could maybe write in some notification into my function. If it failed, I could send an email or something. You can write whatever you want to in these functions to accomplish whatever it is you want to do. But the biggest part about it, and the thing I stress so much, is that you can offload all of this and encapsulate it somewhere else. And if your function was general enough and it was widely used, you can have multiple systems can call this function. This one's a blob trigger because it just happens automatically, but if you had a timer, if you had something that you called from an HTTP request, you can make these calls whenever you want to then execute this function to do something. There's a couple other examples people have asked me, like, what else would you use it for? And I thought this one because I worked on a modeling agency site one time, and I don't know if anyone has dealt with the modeling agency. They don't have a real good grasp on technology or care about it in any way, so they like to say, oh, here's 100 images, and each of the images are 20 megabytes, and they want them all to display on the website. I'm like, right, we're going to have to do something about that. So that was the kind of that was my muse for this particular demo, because in that case, I don't want to lose their originals because they're a model agent, they'll take it and send it to print or something. But in this case, so I compressed the original down, and that way I was able to manipulate the one they uploaded to a much smaller size that would actually load on a web page, and that way I could keep the original back there. You could do other things. You could, another thing you could do, like within your application, maybe you have some very specific exception logging or something. You can do an HTTP request out to an Azure function. Do it. It's anything you want to put in the cloud by itself without having to worry about everything else accompanying it that you can do with Azure functions. So it's pretty cool. Now, in here you have a monitor. So this is like the live thing. Wonder why they look like that. Let's see. It should have updated that to look different. Like it should have changed it. Oh, it's probably I just have to. No, I changed this trigger. I don't know why it's like still there. That's weird. I would have thought it would have updated to the text I saved right here, but it doesn't seem to. Okay, I don't know. But this live window, this kind of just shows you what's happening at this particular moment in time. But they also added this monitor feature. This wasn't here a couple months ago, and it gives you a history of all the things that happen. And so these are the last. It actually happened on 2 different calls. And it will tell you the context of what it was, and if there was an output, if there was, this was the blob that was passed in, and the log and the context that I identified. So you have this kind of record keeping of how often the function fires if you need it. If you want to, you can disable a function if you want to do that. And then the functions themselves, I need to zoom out because you just can't see it. Let me do this. This particular one, again, is a trigger. So it doesn't really have a lot of inputs or outputs because it's just doing something happens. But you can define specific inputs of things that you're going to be passing into the function, whether it's I don't know if these are specific to a blob trigger or not. I'll just make another function of something else. So I'll pick a timer function. I'll just show you. If you pick an empty one, it's just an empty run, so you have to decide what your inbound properties are and stuff like that. So if you want to do it, you can. And then if I pick I've played with the timer one once. There was another one. Let me see. It's down here. So here's a timer, and it wants to know like what the schedule of the timer is and the syntax that it runs in. So it kind of tells you how often, second, months, weeks, whatever. And then it has the timer itself as the thing that's passed into it. So, and for every function you make, you can actually come down here and run it, and it will, actually it's expecting me to type something. And you can see if you want to run it right then and see what the output is, it will, that way you can kind of do it if you want to. But this one will have like a different, obviously the trigger's different and the schedule. And this is the pretty view. Let me jump back to my function because there's more there. So this is the nice view, the UI view of the blob I have in the storage account. If you want to see, this is what's in that function.json file. It's all right there. They just convert it to a nice pretty view for you. And then they added a ton of stuff below here. This wasn't here. I just saw it last night for the first time. They give you a lot of help on how to interact with the naming patterns. And so I told you I'm specifically only going to process JPEG images, but this will, if you're using a blob trigger, that's the ones I know most about because it's the one I did. And you can say only use these files or ones that start with this particular name, and there's all kinds of stuff you can do with these properties coming in that you can work with to customize and isolate the files that you're processing. And then it will also give you a bunch of, you can bind to these specific things and do stuff like the cloud container, because it's a blob coming in, so you could get the cloud container based off of that. And they give you some examples down here, and there's a JavaScript example. So whatever kind of function you choose, they kind of give you those. So here's a sample of let me do this one, of a timer, and it's giving you the C#. So you can build it out, and if you want to schedule, it kind of gives you all these. It's basically, they brought in the documentation directly into the interface, which is nice. So that way you can not have to struggle through it like I did and look up things in the API reference. I haven't played with every kind of function that there are. I've looked at the timer one. I think I set up one of those just for the heck of it. And I set up an HTTP one, which is you send a request to it. I haven't even seen the webhook ones. I haven't looked into those at all. But you can have a trigger, so whenever it gets a specific request, it will do something. In this case, and you can also set the authorization level that the function works on, whether anyone can call the function, or if you have to be an admin, or if it's the API key level, whatever it is you want to do. So in this case, this function is going to, what's it going to do? I don't know. This is the sample one. It's going to convert the name. It's going to read back the name that I have, or something like that. That's what this function does, this default one. So if I run it there, if I say, Little Rock Tech Fest, it'll probably say Little Rock Tech Fest over here. Of all things, hello, Little Rock Tech Fest. So if you do want to start looking into it, use the different samples that they have, because there's a lot of different ones they've already built out for you, and luckily, again, they give you some very specific things. The blob trigger was the most interesting one to me and the easiest one for me to implement. So, any questions? Yes? Mm-hmm. So in that particular implementation, this was like 2 or 3 years ago that I did that. And Azure Functions didn't exist, because if it had, I would have used something like that. So I had a, let's see, I'm trying to not get too specific. So in our product, I used to work for a custom solution provider, a custom software company that used Kentico, which is the company I work for now. So we use that, and in Kentico, you have the ability to have like a global event handler. So when a specific action, you can subscribe to that event and make something happen. That's what I did. So when they went into the website and they uploaded an image, I immediately took the image and I resized it down, and I saved the original, and I created a smaller version, and that's what was used throughout the website. The original was always there if they wanted to do it, but So basically, anytime it happened, I used the Windows Azure SDK to write that new, smaller file directly to the same storage account that the original was in. Again, that was kind of the inspiration for this, because I could do the same thing here, but then also compress it. I could convert it. I could do whatever I want. I could email it to somebody. You can do whatever you want to inside of your function, but it was pretty resource intensive, and plus it was also a synchronous process. So if they had like 5 images, it had to do that for all 5 images. And with something like this, it's an asynchronous process that happens behind the scenes, so it doesn't ever affect the user's thread because they're working in the web application. This is just happening on the side over here. So that's why I did it for that modeling agency. I don't know if that fully answered your question. So, I mean, what I did here was very similar to the functionality, but if I did have additional functionality, I would possibly maybe build out the function more to do something. I mean, if you notice, I have helper methods and stuff helper functions down here that do things, and you could code that out, but I mean, if you got pretty big, and let's say you had like other libraries or you had several different layers of this, you could make multiple Azure functions and they can call each other. Like this one would be a trigger, but maybe I have a really intensive and complex helper function that does something else. I might make a HTTP trigger function that holds that, and this function calls that via HTTP. You could do something like that. It just really depends on how abstract you want to get with it. There's not a, I don't know if you can, I know you can make files inside of here because obviously I made the project.json. You could probably include in another class inside of here and call that class from, you just know that the run is what's going to happen. That's what's going to start the function. But inside of here, so if I had another class and if I had a helper class inside of here, there are 3 or 4, as long as this could resolve it, I could call them from inside of here too, and they could be another file inside of there. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you could go about it. It just depends on how much you want to structure it. I mean, in that case, if it was completely self-contained, I would probably look into doing that. I would probably make a file inside of this particular function and maybe call it from there. But if that complex function had any prospect of being used outside of this, I'd probably make it its own Azure function that's callable via HTTP or one of the other ones, and then call it from here, and that way it'd be exposed to call from somewhere else as well. So, I mean, it just depends on how you'd want to do it. There's, 100,000 ways. But does that answer the question? Okay, cool. I got there eventually. It's okay. I'm just rambling now anyway because I don't have a whole lot more to show you. But so I haven't looked at the other languages either because I don't know very much. I mean, I've looked at the JavaScript one some. I don't really like JavaScript. Don't throw things at me. I'm a back-end guy, so JavaScript and I don't get along. But if you want to write a Node.js, I mean, you can do the same concept of a timer or blob trigger. If you want to write in Node.js, you can. I've looked at the PowerShell ones a little bit. There's obviously, I don't know why that keeps changing. There's not as many for PowerShell because it just doesn't support that much stuff. But other things you could do is, if you really wanted to build something like this out, like maybe, I could see it in use for like a mobile application. Like, because all your code is really inside of your app, but maybe you need to do something in your app that you don't necessarily want to put in the app because maybe you have 3 different platforms that mobile app runs on, or 2, because I think I'm the only person who uses Windows Phone. But if you had an Android and iOS app, but you had a common function between them instead of putting it in both apps, or I guess you could use Xamarin and just make a single thing, you could take a function like that and put it up in Azure Functions, and now it's available for both of them to call. And because it's in Azure App Service, you can scale that app service. You can have 4 or 5, 100 instances of it. You can scale it up, scale it down. And because it's treating it just like a web app, it's treating it like a mobile service. It's just its own self-contained thing. So that's a pretty interesting way to implement it as well. I mean, there's no limit to what you can do with them. And what's really cool is the different languages too. I think that really opens it up to a lot of different developers. I don't really care because I'm a .NET developer, but I'm sure somebody does Python and Bash. No, kidding. So that, I think it makes it really universal in that capacity. So you can really host anything that you want inside of there. And I hadn't done a lot of stuff with .NET Core, so that was interesting for me to kind of go in and start playing around with as well, so that I could bring in the different dependencies and do stuff. When I first did this, if you made a mistake, you couldn't delete the file. Like if you type projects.json, you couldn't delete it, but now you can delete it. But if you want to edit these, you can change the name or you can update it if you want to have your own file to upload. So this, again, if you had a pre-existing file, you could upload it into here. I don't know why, but I'll pick that. Why not? I never tried to upload an image in here. I may not like that. I don't even know. Probably shouldn't try things on the fly. And yeah, so if your function required this, then I guess you could do that if you wanted to do it. So it's a pretty powerful thing that does quite a bit. And let me do that so I get rid of the stuff. So I wanted to throw up a couple of good links. Most of them are just to the Azure documentation, but there's obviously the introduction to functions, the ones that kind of walk you through it. And then if you want my specific code or a version of it that's very, very similar, that's a link to the blog I wrote, in which I give you the code I wrote. Like, it give you the run function, and so you can see how it all fits together, and I walk you through the whole step of what I just demonstrated to you. Does anybody else have any questions about functions in any way? So. It's an app service. It's just like anything else. It's just like a web app or a mobile service. It's however much, I mean, you put it in an app service plan. So in this case, let me jump back. It's under here. Oh, I didn't show you this stuff. You can do a bunch of other stuff. I'm gonna come back to this. I'm gonna answer your question first. So you put it in a app service plan. Let me see, how can I get into it? So this is the function, but I think it's gonna bring me right back into the spot I was in. But it's whatever your plan is configured at. So I mean, and the way the app service plan is, it's really the underlying web server. So it's however you spec that out. And what do you have on that web server as to whether or not it's capable of doing it. If you have one function on it, you could probably get by pretty low and get a basic, if it's a basic function that hardly does anything, you could do it very cheaply. But if you have the same app service plan that's hosting 20 websites and 100 functions, so you just have to make sure it's beefy enough to handle that. But that is what's going to dictate the cost of it. But there's no extra cost. It's the cost of the app service, because it's just another app service on that environment. There's somewhere it tells you where it is, but I can't remember where it is. Oh, it's under here. So yeah, see, it's at the core, it's an app service. So this is, and this is on my default one plan, and that's what it costs. So, also inside here, you can do a lot of stuff. You can have continuous integration, so that you can work on your function, check it into some source control, and then it will roll it out. You can set up your specific authorization. So if you only wanted certain requests if you only wanted the function to respond to specific IP address and things like that, that's where the cores come into play. And once they use the HTTP trigger, you can tell it how the call is authorized. You have to have the admin key? Is it on a function level? Can anyone call it? And then if you want to, you can set up your own API on your function to allow other people to consume it. I haven't really gone through a lot of steps of that, but I know it's there. And you can, oh look, uploading zips. Interesting. They've integrated Kudu with it. I've heard of Kudu. I'm not very familiar with it though. And then, so the function itself, like every app service, it's really just like a website. It's like a blank .NET Core website if you do a C# one. So you can FTP directly to that folder if you want to, and you can browse it. Or here, you can open up the dev console, it's probably like if I do, see, I'm in www root, so if I do like these are the files that are in my function. So this is the folder for blob trigger one, and I got this host.json. So if you want to manipulate it this way, I guess you could. So blob trigger one, oh, that doesn't exist. So, I mean, if you want to work in here, I guess you can. And this is the physical files that you have inside of there. So this is all new too. This didn't used to be there, so it's kind of cool. And then you have very specific things on your app service if you want to lock it down. But like I said, they're common to every app service configuration. If you want to, you can have, which .NET framework you want it to run on, which PHP version, Java, Python, is it 64-bit? It's just like a website. I mean, you can do all the same stuff for a web app inside of Azure. because that's really what it is at the core. It's just a blank web app with just your functions sitting in it. So you can do whatever it is you want to do there. So, any other questions? Well, that was about it, because I haven't, like I said, I had to come up with this fairly quickly, but I thought it was really cool, and I definitely think that Azure Functions can help you do a lot of stuff, especially if you have resource-intensive processes that you're doing, something that really affects the CPU or your memory. If you have something that takes a huge hit to that, assuming you can put all the correct dependencies in it, you can offload it there, and then you're going to pay for however much that app service uses in the regards of the app, the plan that you're on. But it's a great way to minimize the impact to your website. And if you have something like an asynchronous process, like I have in my example, I don't have to wait for the UI thread to wait on that compression and zipping and all that kind of stuff to happen and copying over to Azure Storage. It's just going to happen behind the scenes. So that way the user can just move along and it will just happen. Now, in that case, you probably would want to put in some sort of exception handling and reporting, so that way if I looked in the Azure portal, I could see that it failed for some reason, but I have no way to know that, so you'd have to build that into your function of some sort of notification process. So, well, if you have any other questions, I'll be glad to discuss them later, or you can feel to reach out to me. If you had any questions about Kentico, if I can help you develop with that in any way, let me know. I'd be glad to do that, and I recommend go check it out. Azure Functions are pretty cool, and hopefully they'll be your super friend. So that's it.